I'm Isabelle Gonthier, Chief Assessment Officer at PSI Services, and I invite you to delve deep into the world of testing with me. Every episode, I'll be on the virtual couch with experts from the testing industry, engaging in conversations about the latest developments in our field. Your quest for testing knowledge starts here. So, welcome to this episode of the Tried and Tested podcast. Today, I have the pleasure to have a conversation with Kristen DiCerbo. She's the Chief Learning Officer at the Khan Academy. Very exciting to have you and have this discussion today about rethinking assessment with AI and really kind of like do a deeper dive of how we're leveraging evidence. So, thank you for joining us for the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, this is great. We always start the conversation with the same question. We want to hear a little bit more about your background and how you got into the assessment space and the learning science and edtech. So interested in your story.
Yes, I initially went to graduate school to be a school psychologist. So for those listening in the United States, and particularly in Arizona, where I went to school and where I live, a school psychologist is not a counselor. A school psychologist is actually the person who evaluates students who are having learning difficulties for things like for eligibility into special education, looking at things like learning disabilities and other causes of students' learning difficulties, and then working with teachers to develop individual education plans for those students. So that practice of school psychology is very much about assessment. So it is mostly doing evaluations of students. So that is where I first became interested in assessment, but in a really practical way. How do we use these assessments to understand how students are processing information, how they're thinking, all of those kinds of things. And I worked in a school district here in the Phoenix area for about 3 years. And as I was doing that, started thinking about technology and these students who are struggling to learn and the teachers that had big caseloads of students and weren't able to give them all the individual attention, even in the special education classrooms that they would like, and started thinking about how could technology help support these teachers and students if we built it based on how we know people learn. And so I took what at the time seemed like a big pivot into edtech, because the place that I started in education technology was Cisco Networking Academies. Cisco, the big networking company, are like, what do they have to do with learning? But it turned out that they were building this curriculum and assessments program that they gave away to community colleges and high schools to teach computer networking skills. And the interesting thing that we started thinking about there was, why are we giving kids multiple choice tests to test their computer networking skills when we could just have them configure a computer network? And from there, instead of, buying all the equipment, what if we created a simulation of a computer network? And then we could have the students configuring the network and all the routers and switches and computers, and we could simulate a hospital or simulate a school and complete the whole network there. So really got interested in thinking about performance-based assessment and simulation-based assessment, and all in the formative assessment space, right? None of this was high stakes, but was interested in that. So I was at Cisco for about 8 years doing that work, and then eventually got recruited over into Pearson, who at the time was starting something called a research and innovation network. And they were interested in thinking about these same kind of things, simulation-based assessment, game-based assessment. And so was thinking there about all of those things, had the opportunity once I was there to work on a project called Glass Lab, which essentially was a collaboration between Pearson, ETS, and Electronic Arts, where we attempted to build SimCity EDU, a game-based assessment to assess students' systems thinking. Now, listeners will notice, here we are in 2026, no one's ever played SimCity EDU, and it's not around.
So what happened to it?
A lot of lessons learned there about game-based assessment and its opportunities and challenges. But so I was at Pearson again for another about 8 years. Pearson sold off its K-12 curriculum division. It's now Savas. I love the K-12 world. I actually never sat in the assessment space at Pearson. I was always in the curriculum space. And so, that also started me thinking about what my next role might be, where I might go next. And at the time, Khan Academy posted their first ever chief learning officer role. And so I applied, and in spring of 2020, first early days of the pandemic, joined Khan Academy, which was a crazy time to be there. You can imagine Khan Academy in the pandemic our traffic was 3 times what we expected and all of that. So was there, and in the summer of 2022, some folks from OpenAI asked us if we wanted to see something, and it was their new this new model they've been training that we now know is GPT-4 that they were planning to release the next spring, but they were interested in thinking about education applications for it. And since then, we have been exploring and prototyping and testing and experimenting with AI and all kinds of learning and assessment applications.
That's amazing. I just love the story and all the interconnections in terms of how it started, how it evolved, but it's all interconnected. And I love the reference to and looking at it's building the learning that is aligned with the needs of the individuals and how to leverage the technology and like looking at it from an early adopter standpoint. It seems like you're an early adopter in so many ways, and you've been leading the charge. So that's exciting.
It is, and I have been both in the game-based assessment space and in the AI and assessment space. I like to be thinking about how new technologies can influence what we do in learning and assessment, but it also means that not everything I build is successful, and not everything, works out of the gate. And it's a process of iteration and learning and all of those things.
Yeah. And it's part of the evolution. And that's the thing. So it's the concept also of fail fast, okay, it's not working. Let's kind of like get back on and figure out how we're going to go about it. And something not going to fruition the way we expected it. It's probably the embryo to something new, a new idea that will get to where it needs to be. So it's great to kind of see the momentum and the continuation. So building from that, so there's been lots of conversations, and you've been engaged in a lot of like different panels and opportunities where you're talking about rethinking measurement through evidence and AI at a high level. So what do you think needs to change most in how we approach assessment and as learning, and as from a learning standpoint, and as the work and the requirements continue to evolve in this era of like AI and technology?
Yes, it's interesting because there's so much assessment in the world, and almost no one is really happy with how we assess people.
People don't like taking assessments. How's that?
People don't like taking assessments. There's a big portion of the world that doesn't trust what assessments tell them, or doesn't think that assessments are testing the right things, and even people who really work in the assessment field, I think, see lots of ways that assessment could be better and different, and how they fit together. So on the very high level of, what's the challenge of rethinking assessment, it is, I think, to help people feel good about assessment, to be building assessments that people value and that provides information that helps people improve in their lives and in the ways that they want to. So I think that's the really big picture answer. But getting to the kind of the next level down, I think there's a lot of challenges just in understanding how do the activities that we give people as we're assessing them relate to the skills and knowledge and attributes that we're trying to assess. And with so much new technology, can we do that differently now?
Yeah. And I think that's the opportunity. And again, I think it's a wonderful objective to kind of look at it in a way where if people can get to a point where assessment becomes just part of like what we're doing, and it doesn't become so, built up with the anxiety because I'm being assessed. But if it's kind of more fluid, more adaptive, more interactive, that's kind of the opportunity we have, I feel like today, to make it as seamless as possible, but but still getting us to understand, gather the evidence required to be able to make determinations, decisions, or plans for what's the next step, what's the learning plan, what's the opportunity, do they meet the requirements, so on and so forth. And I agree. I think that's, if we're able to sort of like evolve how we build assessments, how we deliver assessments to make it less of a, I have to do this and this is stressful and I have to study and so on and so forth. I think that will kind of get us to a much better place in so many ways.
Yes, it's interesting. In 2014, I co-authored this white paper with my good colleague John Behrens that we called Assessment in the Digital Ocean. And the idea was, we're doing so much in digital environments now.
Mm-hmm.
Why do we have to say, wait, stop at the end of the year? Here's your 2 hours to show us what you know, when we have so much evidence of what they know from the whole year that they've been working on all of these digital environments and where those are. So it definitely is the case that over time, I have learned that there is still some benefit sometimes to saying, like, okay, right now we're going to clear out all the other noise and sit down and give us a clean, like, show us what you know. But I don't think it has to be as high stakes and once a year and all of that. And we can combine the evidence from different sources, combine that digital data with some of these more structured opportunities to create a better picture of what people know as well.
And I think that's it. It feels like there is a purpose and a value to being able to step back, stop, assess, to determine where you're at. It's really important. But I think there's an opportunity to continue to think about the moments and the points and times that, the fluidity around that we can build around it, I think is our opportunity. When we, and it's interesting because I think it leads into some of the conversation topics that we sort of had identified we wanted to have. But when we think about the importance of distinguishing between task models and evidence models. It's important to kind of think about these two things. They're interrelated, but they're also very different. And when we think about behavioral-based assessments, performance-based assessment, talk to me a little bit more about that and the why.
Yes. So this language comes from the evidence-centered design, which was really founded by Bob Mislevy, Russell Almond, and they, have written a lot about this. I was lucky enough that Bob worked with us on the Cisco Networking Academy project. And so I got this personal tutoring in this language. But the power of what evidence-centered design gives us is a language to talk about what the different components of assessment. And so there's the skills that you want to assess. So that's the student model. There's the thing you have them do. So that's the task model. But then there's the what you're able to extract from that task, and that's your evidence model. So to make that clear, a task could be answering a multiple choice question, right? That's the task. You read the stem, you select an option. Your evidence is the option that they picked. So that's pretty clear. What if you are playing SimCity? Your activity is doing all the things that you can do in SimCity, and your evidence components. All the log of everything the student does, and as part of that. So that's basically to throw another word out there. That's basically the work product. That whole stream of everything they've done. Now, what we need to do is identify what actually in that stream tells us about the thing we're trying to measure. So that's evidence identification. So that's part of your evidence model is what are the things that a student does when they're playing SimCity that tell us about their systems thinking. Spoiler alert, one of the problems was there's so much that people can do in SimCity. They would never get to the things that would tell us about their systems thinking. They would spend
too much noise,
an hour playing, and none of it would give us any signal about their systems thinking skills. And so that idea of thinking about what is the evidence that we get from the task and thinking about those as two separate things, it can be helpful to understand and pull apart what evidence we're getting about what we want to measure.
Yeah, no, and then that's a great explanation of this, and the importance again of like connecting those dots, but at the same time also that differentiation. What's also really interesting as we think of that, and also think about what AI provides as an opportunity. It provides the ability to design activities that much look like way more like the real life and what we're really kind of looking at, possibly evaluating in a real life situation. Um, can you share an example of an AI enabled activity that does this really well and why that matters from a validity standpoint?
Yes. So one of the things that we're experimenting with right now at Khan Academy is an activity called Explain Your Thinking. And what
Hmm.
it's meant to mimic is what happens when a teacher sits next to a student after they've done a problem and says, "Oh, tell me why you did this step here," or "What does
Hmm.
37 mean here?" And have that conversation. And what that gives us, many times as an assessment creator, I've looked at something a student did and said, "Does this mean this or does this mean that?" And we're trying to like make this inferential leap from what we see them do on the test to what we're
Hmm.
inferring about what they know. And so that inferential, I call that the inferential distance between the thing we observe and the inference we're trying to make.
Yeah.
And what this AI is doing is basically closing some of that inferential distance. In this Explain Your Thinking, instead of trying to infer their thinking, we're literally asking them, what were you
Hmm.
thinking when you did this step, and what that looks like. So that idea of having the AI be able to create different tasks, I think is important, and tasks that are closer to the real world task we want them to make.
Hmm.
There's another example. If you think about collaborative problem solving, the PISA assessment attempted to measure
Yeah.
collaborative problem solving. But at the time, the technology wasn't there to be able to have a dialogue. So it ended up being that the the computer character would say something, and then it would give the test taker three options, three collaborative problem solving options of what they could say next. Well, that's okay, but who
It's
knows if that's really what the person would
yeah.
have said.
It's very
So you can
scripted.
imagine,
Yeah.
it's very
Hmm.
scripted. So you can imagine now a tool where the learner actually gets to have what they would say in that situation, and so it gives you a lot richer than evidence about what they might be doing, and where that is. So it just, the AI opens up the ability to create new kinds of tasks and activities that then will give us different kinds of evidence.
And to be as well like way more adaptive and flexible in the direction that it's taking. And I think that's been one of the huge challenge from an assessment standpoint, is that because we need to get to specific elements we need to assess, you sort of need to drive the people there. But with AI and the way you sort of can try to interconnect, the evolution of thinking, of the activity and all of that, you can more efficiently collect that evidence, put it together, and create that summary of outputs basically that will give you the information you need for whether it's to identify gaps in learning, whether it's determine levels of competence, whether it's proficiency, and so on and so forth. But I think that the adaptive aspect is to me where I see the most exciting potential. And yes, computer adaptive kind of types of tests, it's not new. It's not new, but it was always done in a very structured and confined way. Now it's just like being able to interact with the technology just opens up another world from my perspective.
Yes. Although you need to be a little bit careful, as
Mhm.
we saw in the SimCity example, if it is possible to go places that aren't going to give you good
Mhm.
evidence, and it's
Yeah.
possible, so you do need to have constraints on where,
Yes.
how far you go. But yes, there was a good amount of research actually from ETS researchers around conversation based assessment prior
Hmm.
to generative AI, and they literally had these dialogue trees where they would, map out, either if they choose option B, then the dialogue goes here, and then the next dialogue goes here. And
Yeah.
there's just no way to have that adaptivity that you're talking about in that environment.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that caution is really important because we can get very much excited with the opportunity, but we still need to structure it in a way to get us the information we need. And that structure needs to exist. So, absolutely. I think that's a very, very critical point. And now a short break. Hello, tried and tested listeners and fellow testing enthusiasts. I'm Isabelle Gonthier, your guide through the fascinating world of credentialing. Each week, we dive deep with expert guests to explore the hottest topics in certification and licensure testing. If you're enjoying our journey through lifelong learning and innovation, take a moment to subscribe wherever you get your podcast. And if you know someone passionate about testing or curious about the latest testing trends, why not share this podcast with them? It might just be the inspiration they need. Thank you for tuning in and being part of our community. Remember, sharing knowledge is one of the best ways to grow our industry together. Keep listening. You've mentioned your involvement in the Glass Lab. So looking back in that work, what did it teach you about what actually counts as meaningful evidence? And what do teams still tend to overinterpret when they're looking at the data?
Yes. So here's a fun example that we would see kids do. We ended up, because we needed to provide some constraints on the experience, the experience ended up being we presented them with a city that was already built, but the residents were getting sick and they needed to figure out what was going on and help them get healthier. And it turns out, after working through it, that it was air pollution that was causing a lot of the sickness, and they had to figure out how to reduce air pollution. But there were some students who would just bulldoze the entire city, right? Like, we'd look at their lawn,
Kill it.
bulldoze the entire city. All right, what do you infer from that? Does that mean they understood that the best way to reduce air pollution is just bulldoze the whole thing down? Was it just that bulldozing things is fun and they tried it and now they're just going to do it? Does it mean anything about systems thinking or not anything about systems thinking? So what we learned is, even, when you give this much space and these many potential things that folks can do, it can become really difficult to interpret the evidence and where things are. And then that open sandbox that's the game type that SimCity is, students would play for a long time. And we were building these models in a Bayesian network, which means you have kind of this variable you're trying to assess, and then you would have different pieces of evidence. And they would engage in 40 minutes of gameplay, and we would end up with about 6 pieces of evidence. Did they set up alternative energy sources? Did they, those kinds of things? But there was so much else that wasn't there, and we were only getting a little bit in terms of the evidence that was really feeding into our model of this systems thinking variable that we were trying to measure. So it certainly presents challenges just in terms of thinking about what that is. And that was ultimately one of the things that was an issue with the game overall, aside from the fact that it took us about 8 months to build and a lot of money, and it ended up being, maybe a 40 minutes of gameplay, and you could replay it 2 or 3 times, but that's about it. That's just not scalable in,
definitely
in the world
not.
of creating assessments and what that looks like. But apart from that, it really was this idea of we could have constrained the game even more to get the precise evidence, but that takes away the fun. The whole fun of SimCity is that you get to try all these things and see what works. So that balance of the open space with getting the evidence you need is a challenge, no matter, I think, in any of these kind of new ways of assessment.
But I think it's also very much reflective in the way of the real world, meaning that, nobody has the luxury of being able to say, I'll do whatever I want, whenever I want. There's kind of structure, rigor, limits, and all of that. And it's how you operate within that, how you define it, that will give the lead you to the outcomes that you're looking for. But yeah, I agree. I agree with what you're saying. It's interesting because it's that balancing where you want to make it fun, you want to make it engaging, because that's kind of what reduces, again, the anxiety level, flexible and all of that. But to some extent, you still need to accomplish the goals. So that structure is necessary. So,
yes, there has to be a happy medium between filling in bubbles on a sheet and
yes.
doing anything you want in an open environment. There's some place in the middle there.
Somewhere in between, there's a lot of flexibility, but yes,
Yes.
absolutely. It's interesting, the work you do at the Khan Academy. That's the advantage of working in low stakes formative environment, where you can pilot things, you can learn, you can try things. So I'm interested to hear a little bit about why you believe new approaches to measurements should start there in a way, and what does it tell us in terms of how we then make it and put it into action?
Yeah, it's all about the consequences of the decisions that you're making with assessment information. So if the biggest consequence, if the information is a little bit wrong, is that a student maybe practices 2 or 3 questions that they already know, that's a pretty low stakes assessment, and that's fine. No problem. If the consequence of the assessment is you're not going to move on to the next grade, or you're not going to get into college, that's a huge, that's high stakes. So it makes sense to try new technologies when the consequences for something not being exactly precise are very low. And so that's why, I think these new experiments should start in that more formative space. And I think it's an interesting, place to work, but it gives us, as we were talking about before, that idea of failing and iterating. You can't fail if the consequences of that failure are really high. Your assessment can't fail. It has to be valid and reliable and all of those things. I know when I was at Pearson, the folks that were on the assessment side, would have to go to court to defend the validity and reliability of these assessments. And that's not where new technology is. It won't stand up to that level of scrutiny. So it needs to be the things we're trying that are new need to be in those more low stakes and formative environments.
Yeah, absolutely, and that's kind of where when we're playing, with a lot of new tools and opportunities and all of that. But yeah, thinking about the stakes is really important, and the way I also think about it is that it's also not one size fits all. Some of the types of tools and more flexible, adaptive tools will be really well suited for certain environment in certain contexts, for certain profession. If we think about credentialing, for instance, but in other cases, you need more of that structure, more of that kind of control, because the decisions that are made can lead to, issues with public safety or so on and so forth. So that's where sometimes when we have conversations and people get really, really excited, is to say, absolutely, but there's different case scenarios and a time and place for certain innovation that you can test out. And then you can think about, yes, let's challenge our thinking on how we do the high stakes assessments, because we always have to question ourselves, but we also have to think about the consequences of some of the changes and how we're implementing the new technology, the nice and shiny things that are really fun, but also can have some consequences in terms of the actual results and inferences you're making.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, so we're having those conversations on a regular basis, and I love it because on one hand, it shouldn't limit the opportunity to really push us and think differently, but always kind of thinking about where it's applicable, how it's applicable. So yeah.
Yeah, and it can be tough. Like we are, in this, Gartner has something they call the hype cycle for lots of new technologies, but we're certainly in it for AI, where you go up, it's a graph, so I'm making this picture with my hands, of you go up to the peak of inflated expectations, and then where you think this technology is going to solve all of our problems, and then you're trying it and it's not doing it and it's not working, not solving all your problems, and you go into what they call the trough of disillusionment.
Oh, okay.
And then ideally you come out of that into a middle ground they call the plateau of productivity, where you figure out what the technology can and can't do. But when you're in that peak of like high expectations, there's a lot of pressure, even in the high stakes assessment world. What are you doing with AI? What are you doing with AI?
Yes.
You're going to have to go through that whole cycle until you figure out, all right, what can it do and what can't it do and what that means.
Yeah, it definitely feels we're in the hype right now, for sure. And managing expectations and pushing the limits, but at the same time, sort of like, woo, okay.
Yes.
But it's good. It's good though. I think we're gonna look back at that time in a few years from now and be like, wow, we survived,
right,
and we got on the other side, which is going to be like a good side. I'm convinced.
Yeah.
So looking ahead, what are some of the developments when you think about AI and measurement? And what are you kind of watching most closely? And what gets you excited about what the potential is?
So on the technology side, there's certainly this idea of multimodal AI, which is AI that can in real time see what you're working on, have a conversation. So right now, the large language models are largely text-based, and most people interact with them by typing back and forth. Almost 2 years ago now, Sal Khan's my boss, the founder of Khan Academy. Sal did this demo with his son at OpenAI, where they had a little prototype where he and his son were sitting next to each other, and they were working on a geometry problem with a triangle, and the AI could see the diagram, and they were, having a conversation about what's the adjacent side and all of that, and the AI was able to interact in that space with all of that multimodal capabilities. That is still not capabilities that are widely available. My understanding is the amount of power needed to do that at scale, we can't do with our current chips. So we kind of need a new generation of chips to be able to do that. But you can imagine an AI interaction like that, an assessment that would be, absolutely change the game from where we are now, if it could really see what the student was doing and how all of that works. So that's really interesting. On a totally different flavor, there's thinking about how the models could potentially get a lot smaller and live on devices, which has a lot of potential for privacy and data security, and thinking about, not having all of this data traveling all over. And if folks, are concerned about those kinds of outcomes, I think, we could potentially be looking at those kinds of solutions for AI to come in the future that would really be more protective of, test takers' data and what they're doing and what they know.
Yeah. It's interesting that you say that, because oftentimes we hear a lot about the threats that it's posing to privacy and to from misconduct perspective and so on and so forth. But the flip side of it is that the protecting aspect of it as well, that to have that layer of protection and the opportunities along the line. So it's kind of the two sides of the coins in a way. Yeah. Well, this has been like a fabulous conversation. As we wrap up, what would be a piece of advice you would give to our listeners in the assessment world, measurement, credentialing, and so on and so forth, around as we think about how we leverage technology, AI, to establish ways of assessing and rethinking how we're leveraging those technologies? What would be sort of the piece of advice to them in terms of in their considerations, in their questions that they might have?
One of the things that we haven't touched on yet is the ability of the AI to code now, which has gotten so good. Yeah. And when I think to, when I was trying to build simulation-based assessments, we would, just creating one simulation for a physics exam was, $30,000 and 3 months of work to get the whole thing going. You could spin up a prototype of that in 30 minutes right now. And like that ability for us to think more broadly about the assessment items, and the assessment itself wouldn't have to have AI in it, but our ability to make different kinds of items and activities and generate more of them quickly, I think really changes too. So my general advice for everyone in this space is get in and try things. Like if you're not in and playing around and trying, it all seems very daunting and very scary. But just get in and try something, build something. And any of these vibe coding tools, they often, have different ways you can just go in and try something and see what happens. I think just doing that then opens your mind to what could be and what are possibilities in how you're thinking about things. So get in and play.
Yeah, I love it. I think that's a great piece of advice is don't be scared. Just go in. You're not going to break anything. Try it, explore, engage, and see what it gives you. And then ask for help. If you're not sure about something or you want to further an idea and you don't know where to start, well, then there's lots of people that can support and help you. But yeah, just diving in and trying it out. Like there's so many tools that are available that can get you to experiment. So I think that's a great piece of advice. Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for your time. I really appreciated the conversation, and let's keep it going.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Tried and Tested, brought to you by PSI and ETS. We hope today's discussions gave you valuable insights into the world of testing and assessment. Be sure to subscribe so you don't miss future episodes featuring experts and innovators across the assessment industry. New episodes are released every other Thursday. We hope you tune in next time to Tried and Tested. Keep listening.